Well, good morning. Welcome to the 88th day of this wonderful, not so wonderful quarantine. Read aloud. Here we go. Okay, here we go. What do we got? So we were forewarned. The trouble was, the forewarning was no use at all, not so far as the mice were concerned. We were approaching the lighted square of the opening when the roar began. The blast of air came like a sudden whistling gale. It took my breath and flattened my ears against my head, and I closed my eyes instinctively. I was still in the rear, and when I opened my eyes, I saw one of the mice sliding past me, clawing uselessly with his small nails at the smooth metal beneath him. Another followed him, and still another, as one by one they were blown backward into the dark maze of tunnels we had just left. I braced myself in the corner of the shaft and grabbed at one as he slid by. It was the white mouse. I caught him by one leg and pulled him around behind me and held on. Another blew face on into the rat ahead of me and stopped there. It was Jonathan, who had been near the lead. But the rest were lost, 6 in all. They were simply too light. They blew away like dead leaves, and we never saw them again. In another minute, the roar stopped. The rush of air slowed from a gale to a breeze, and we were able to move forward again. I said to the white mouse, "You'd better hold on to me. That might happen again." He looked at me in dismay. "But what about the others? 6 are lost. I've got to go back and look for them." Jonathan quickly joined him. "I'll go with you." "No," I said. "That would be useless and foolish. You have no idea which shaft they were blown into, nor even if they all went the same way. And if you should find them, how would you find your way out again? And suppose the wind comes again? Then there would be 8 lost instead of 6. The wind did not come again. Half a dozen times more, or the wind did come again, half a dozen times more while we worked with the screwdriver to pry open the screen. Each time we had to stop work and hang on. The 2 mice clung to the screen itself. Some of us braced ourselves behind them in case they should slip. And Justin, taking the thread with him as a guideline, went back to search for the other 6. He explored shaft after shaft to the end of the spool, calling softly as he went, but it was futile. To this day, we don't know what became of those 6 mice. They may have found their way out eventually, or they may have died in there. We left an opening in the screen for them, just in case. The screen was heavy wire, with holes about the size of an acorn, and it was set in a metal frame. We pried and hammered at it with a screwdriver, but we could not move it. It was fastened on the outside. We couldn't see how. Finally, the white mouse had an idea. "Push the screwdriver through the wire near the bottom and pry up." We did it again, prying down and left and right, and the hole in the wire grew slowly bigger until the white mouse said, "I think that's enough." He climbed to the small opening, and by squirming and twisting, he got through. Jonathan followed him, and they both fell out of sight. But in a minute, Jonathan's head came back in view of the outside. "It's a sliding bolt," he said. "We're working on it." Inside, we could hear the faint rasping as the 2 mice tugged on the bolt handle, working it back, and then the crack as the base of the screen widened. We pushed it open. We were standing on the roof of Nim, free. The Boniface Estate. Miss Frisbee said, "Jonathan and Mr. Ages got the screen open." "Yes," Nicodemus said, "and without them I doubt that we could have done it. The steel frame was strong, the bolt was secure, and the wire so stiff we could not have bent it enough for one of us to go through. So we were glad that they were with us and asked them if they would, after all, like to stay with us. Since there were only 2 of them, they said they would, for the time being at least." And now began a journey that was to last, with some interruptions for almost 2 years. Parts of it were pleasant. It was a joyful feeling at first just to be free again and to get those laboratory collars off. And parts of it were terrible. I have made notes of it all, and if time ever comes when rats publish books of their own, I intend to write a book about it. It would be a long book, full of trouble and danger, too much to tell now. It was one of the dangerous times that I lost my eye and got the scar you see on my face. But we did have some happy times and some pieces of great good luck, two in particular that helped to explain how we got here and what our plans are now. It was early summer when we got out. We had known that beforehand. We could tell by the lateness of the light through the windows. Though it was dark when we finally stood on the roof, we had no trouble getting down the side of the building. However, there were downspouts in the corners with plenty of toe holes, and we dropped the screwdriver and the spool of thread into one of these. A little lower, there was ivy, and we were all good climbers, and there was moonlight to see by. In less than 15 minutes, we were on the ground, staying in the darkest shadows under the bushes when we could, and we sped away from them, not knowing or caring at first what direction we were going. Nobody saw us. During the next few weeks, we lived as we could. We had, in a way, to learn all over again how to get along, for although the world outside the laboratory was the same, we ourselves were different. We were, a couple of times, reduced to eating from dumps and garbage cans, but knowing how to read, we quickly learned to recognize signs on buildings. Groceries, supermarkets, meats and vegetables, for instance, let us know that there was food inside for the taking. And once inside a supermarket at night, they always leave a few lights on. We could even read the signs on the wall directing us to Section 8 for dairy products, cheese, Section 3 for baked goods, and so on. In the country, there were barns and silos stocked with grain and corn and chicken houses full of eggs. Occasionally, we came upon other rats, and a few times we talked to them, but not for long, because after just a few words, they would begin to look at us strangely, and edge away. Somehow they could tell that we were different. I think we even looked different. Either the diet or the injections at NIM had made us bigger and stronger than other rats, and all the strange rats we saw looked to us surprisingly weak and puny, so we were set apart from even our own kind. It was while we were in the country that we had our first important stroke of luck. We had just about decided, after nearly 4 months of freedom and constant roving, to find a place to settle down, if not permanently, at least for winter. We thought that it would be in the country, but not too far from town, so that we would have access to grocery stores as well as barns and gardens. It was about this time, too, that I began to wonder and worry somewhat about the fact that whatever we ate, whatever we needed, must always be stolen. Rats had always lived that way, and yet why? I talked to some of the others about this. It was the beginning of a discontent, an idea that kept growing, although slowly. The season was autumn. We were walking one evening down a winding country road. We never walked really on the road, but along the edge so that we could vanish into the bushes or a ditch if anyone came along. You can imagine that 20 rats and 2 mice traveling in procession would cause comment, and we did not want that. As we walked, we reached a very high fence of wrought iron, the kind that looks like a row of black iron spears fastened together with pointed tops. An expensive fence, surrounding a large estate with a big and expensive-looking house in the middle, well-kept grounds and gardens. We walked along past this fence until we reached a gate. "There's nobody living in there," said Justin. "How do you know?" "The gate's padlocked, and look, dead weeds standing outside of it, not even bent. Nobody's driven in here for a while." The house had a quiet, deserted look. There was a mailbox in front, hanging open, empty. "I wonder if we can get in," Jenner said. "Why should we? It's a big place. It would have a big pantry, big cupboard, big freezer. If it's as empty as it looks." We turned into the grounds, moved cautiously, and from beneath some bushes we watched the windows. As dusk fell, lights came on in several of them, both upstairs and down. Jenner said, "That's supposed to make us think there's somebody there." "Yes," said Justin, "but there isn't. I could see one of the lamps when it came on. There was nobody near it, and they all came on at the same time. Automatic switches to keep burglars away." "Well, they're not keeping me away," said Justin. He ran to the house, climbed to one of the windowsills and looked in. He tried another, and he came back. "Nobody," he said. So we went in. We found a small window in the back with a cracked pane, knocked out one last corner of glass, and climbed through. At first we planned to look for food, and we found it too, enough to last us for a year or more. As Jenner had predicted, there was a big freezer, well-stocked, bread, meat, vegetables, everything. A whole room full of shelves covered with canned food. The cans baffled us at first, as they had in the grocery stores. We could read what was in them, but we couldn't get it out. Then Arthur found a machine on the kitchen counter, and he read the instructions on the side of it. "Slide can under cutter and press switch." We tried it. The can turned slowly around to the machine, and when we pulled it out, the top had been cut free. I'll always remember what was in the first can: clam chowder, delicious. After we had eaten, we wandered around the house. It was a rich man's mansion with beautiful furniture and fine rugs and carpeting on the floor. There was a crystal chandelier in the dining room and a big stone fireplace in the living room. But the greatest treasure of all for us was in the study. This was a large rectangular room with walnut paneling, walnut desk, leather chairs, and walls lined to the ceiling with books. Thousands of books about every subject you could think of. There were shelves of paperbacks, there were encyclopedias, histories, novels, philosophies, and textbooks of physics, chemistry, electrical engineering, and others, more than I could name. Luckily, there was even one of those small ladders on wheels they use in libraries to get to the top shelves. Well, we fell on those books with even more appetite than on the food, and in the end, we moved into the house and stayed all winter. We could do that, it turned out, without much fear of discovery. We learned that from the newspaper cuttings I found on the desk in the study. They were about a wedding, and most of them showed pictures of a newly married couple leaving a house to begin their honeymoon. The groom was a Mr. Gordon Boniface, heir to the Gould Stelzen fortune, and the house they were leaving was the house we were in, according to the clippings. They were going on a trip all the way around the world, and they were coming back to Boniface Estates in May. Until then, it was our estate. Oh, there was a caretaker gardener who came 3 times a week, and once in a while he would check the house in a cursory sort of way. That is, he would unlock the front door, glance around to see that everything looked all right, and then lock it and leave. But he didn't live there. He lived in a small house down the road, and we were expecting him when he came. We had figured out from the way the place was kept, the lawns mowed, leaves raked, gardens weeded and watered, that there had to be somebody working on it. So we posted a watch, saw him coming, and kept watching him all the time he was here, and we made sure when he looked in the house that everything did look all right. This involved a certain amount of work. We had to haul all our empty tin cans and other trash at night out into a hidden place in the woods quite far from the house. We cleaned up after ourselves carefully. We learned to use water taps and the dusting cloths we found in the kitchen closet. If the caretaker had looked more closely, in fact, he would have seen that the kitchen counters were somewhat shinier than they had been in an empty house, but he didn't. He never even noticed the small corner of glass missing from the back window. And all winter, far into the night, we read books and we practiced writing. All right, that's the end of that chapter. We'll read more on Monday.